don't think Doug Ford or the people in his administration believe they have an ideology. I don't believe they have come to a rational conclusion that there's a better way to be a conservative than what I or you would say.
Disruptive America, July 4th.
Weird thing to happen. I don't know if people remember who this guy is. Jamil Jivani. He's a conservative MP for Bowmanville-Oshawa North. And he's made quite a name for himself. He's very, very vocal on certain key issues. He talks about crime. He talks about, the temporary foreign worker program. Well, here to break some of this down. So Jamil Jivani says victims of crime deserve justice and they're not getting it. Just listen to this heartbreaking letter from the mother of a human trafficking survivor. So this is him at the House of Commons, and he's about to read a letter from a survivor of human trafficking, which is a very, very high up crisis in this country. A lot of people don't know about that. We talk about fentanyl extensively because of drug trafficking, but human trafficking is also an alarming rate that never gets discussed to its full extent. But Jamil Jivani seems to be one of the very few politicians actually willing to address this. And here's a statement.
The system of chaos and disorder is the status quo under the current Prime Minister. And the reality is that by opposing Bill S-224, by putting forward an amendment that renders it absolutely meaningless, the Liberal government is clinging to the status quo. They are clinging to the chaos and disorder that they have caused. The crime of human trafficking is a particularly heartbreaking one. It exploits the most vulnerable people in our communities. And for those of us from Ontario, it hits close to home. From 2012 to 2022, 2/3 of the human trafficking cases reported across Canada occurred in Ontario. The 401 highway corridor has become a hub for trafficking crimes, and it is fair for Canadians to expect some action from the government to address these concerns. We have heard from police officers who are frustrated with the status quo, police officers who have said quite openly that it makes it harder for them to do their jobs. I'd like to quote a member of the Durham Regional Police Service, who I'm fortunate enough to say serves my home community of Durham. And the Detective Constable Jeff Tucker said, and I quote, "There is a lack of understanding for the victims. The victims are re-traumatized every time they have to testify over and over again. The criminal justice system provides more rights to the accused than the victims. Victims are not protected by the system, only criminals." This is a very serious problem, and it's not hard to see why police officers would be disappointed with the status quo that we have. Currently, under the law, only 8% of human trafficking offenders are convicted, and Bill S-224 in its original form sought to solve this problem. The justice system is broken, to put it bluntly, and it's not hard to figure out who is responsible. The Liberal Prime Minister, in power for 9 years, is responsible. Despite all his efforts to claim no responsibility for his own actions, he has broken the justice system, and of course, correction is necessary. I would like to use my time to share the perspective of the mother of a human trafficking victim. Linda Harlos has been a champion for Bill S-224 in its original form. Linda is an advocate in the fight against human trafficking, the founder of the organization Parent with Purpose, where she's a sex trafficking and abuse prevention educator, and shares her story of being the mother of a sex trafficking survivor. Linda writes, "In the current global landscape, the question is not if a child will be targeted for exploitation, but when. We must ask ourselves, are our protocols robust enough to prevent them from becoming victims, and if they do, to ensure justice is served? Every night I lay my head on my pillow, tormented by the knowledge that my naivety led to my daughter's trafficking. Can you, as policymakers and leaders, rest easy without feeling shame or guilt, knowing that justice remains out of reach for her due to a lack of proof for her suffering? Was she expected to photograph the moment she was being waterboarded for not complying with a client's demands? Should she have documented her trafficker threatening her son's life as retribution for her refusal to allow further abuse? In a household of 3 women, 2 have endured repeated sexual assault, yet these incidents remain unreported. Why? Because we are painfully aware that current laws will re-victimize us without delivering justice. My daughter would willingly face re-victimization if there were any hope that justice would prevail. While local organizations excel at addressing victims' basic needs, they fall short in securing justice. The solution is straightforward. Punish those who exploit our children and the perpetrators who buy from them, not the victims. It is imperative that we strengthen our legal frameworks to protect and deliver justice for the most vulnerable among us. I thank Linda for her work and for her advocacy. I thank all of the people who stood up in support of victims of violent crime, including the member for Oshawa, who has been a tireless advocate. And I would say that members of this House have an important decision to make. Will they support Bill S-224 in its in its original form, or will they allow a liberal amendment to continue promoting chaos and disorder across our country? It should be a no-brainer. It should be very obvious that change is needed and that the course correction of this country is in the hands of its leaders to listen to the people of Canada. I leave that on the conscience of all members of this House, and I thank you for giving me the chance to speak in support of victims' rights.
So that was, how many times have you heard that from a politician? How many times do you actually hear someone addressing these concerns? Because 99.9% of the media, 99.9% of what you see at House of Commons is just this back and forth garbage, rhetoric, one side's better than the other, or, how to deal with Trump, how to deal with tariffs, and blah, blah, blah. This is particularly an individual, and again, I give credit where credit's due. I'm not favorable of any party. I'm kind of, very much a pro post-duopolis. I don't view the Conservatives or the Liberals or NDP or Green Party or even the People's Party as any, real measure of hope. But I do look at certain people and certain points that they make, and this is particularly a big case to make, that the fact that human trafficking, and you could see all the news headlines about human trafficking, smuggling in Ontario and BC. One of the reasons that the port workers in BC were striking was because there was complaints. There was people that were mentioning that they heard screams. They heard, children. They heard people inside these shipping containers that they were transporting without being, supervised, without being looked at, without seeing what was actually in these containers. If you're hearing screams from what sounds like human beings inside these shipping containers, I think the Port Authority has every right to open up these containers and see what's inside, but they were told not to. So, there's so much darkness to this. There's so much darkness to this. And again, answers the question why Canada's very tight-lipped about talking about Jeffrey Epstein, talking about this, because we know that Canada's very complicit in sex trafficking, very complicit in human smuggling organizations all across the world. We know about this. We know about the Carney family. We know about the Trudeau family. We know about all this. So, what is actually being done about it? What's actually being done about it? Because it's one thing to address this in the House of Commons and read a letter that should shock people and should, be a stark reminder of how just livid it is to be a young individual, especially a young woman, in a society where you don't know you're going to be part of being captivated into this trafficking network. And a lot of young women, young girls, children, parents, all sorts of people are, very, very much in panic and paranoia and fearful, knowing these more statistics are coming out and hearing this information. So what is actually being done about this? That's what I want to know. That's what so many people want to know. That's why I've been very crucial about how we need to release the Epstein files. Not because I think Donald Trump's on the list or not because I want to, point the finger at Bill Clinton and say, "Hi, you're a pedo yourself." I don't really care who's on the list per se or why they're on the list, but I want to know the information. I want to know what agencies are involved in this. I want to know what corporations are facilitating and backing trafficking networks. I want to know those perpetrators that we can cut the systematic flow, the financial investment that's backing this organized crime syndicate. I want to stop this. I want to stop people promoting this through financial assets, through back channels. I want to stop the corruption that gets involved, that continues on to this day, and involves so many individuals far beyond Epstein's network. So that's a powerful statement to be made. And again, when have you ever heard a politician, especially in Canada, mention about that? So even Mark Nixon pointed this out. Jamil Jivani is the first MP with the guts to say this. Canada's temporary foreign worker program is killing wages and displacing Canadians from their own job market. Temporary, more like permanent damage to the middle class. So Jamil Jivani is actually one of the first politicians before Pierre Poilievre, before Michelle Rampell. He was actually the first to say we need to cut the temporary foreign worker program. He was the first person to bring attention to this because he knew how damaging it was. He knew that it was going to cause a spike in unemployment. He knew that it was an exploited measure, not only for the Canadian workers, but also for the migrants themselves, that they're being part and captured and trafficked into these companies to use them for scab labor. And he was the first to call this out. So while I give credit to Pierre Poilievre for being kind of the main head of bringing this to attention, bringing this to the media spotlight, a lot of attention has to go to this guy. A lot of grace has to go to this guy for being the very first to bring this up. And I don't think even Pierre Poilievre is willing to, mention his name in context of stopping the temporary foreign worker program, even though this guy was the first to point it out. So this guy, Jamil Jivani, has really put a name out there for himself, has really been a fierce advocate for a lot of different things that a lot of Canadians are supportive of. Again, I'm not supportive of the Conservative Party. I'm not conservative of the Liberal Party. I don't believe in, these political cults, if you will. I am an individual that focuses on policy, and I don't care where it comes from. I don't care what person says it. I am focused on people that are willing to fight for the good. As Frederick Douglass says, I'm willing to unite with anyone to do good and no one to do evil. And if this guy's going to do good, I'm willing to stick by him. I don't care that he's a Conservative Party. I don't care that he's all the way in Durham, Oshawa. I don't care. If he's willing to stick his neck out and do the good for Canada, I'm willing to support that. And I'm not going to support someone that does bad. But here's what this guy really interesting and why I bring this to attention is because now he's going after Doug Ford. So Jamil Jivani, who's a federal Conservative MP for Bowmanville, for Oshawa in that area, he's going after the progressive Conservative Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. And as CBC Watcher points out, there's shots fired back. I don't think Doug Ford or people in his administration believe they have an ideology. There are people who think the goal of politics is to have power and maintain power for as long as possible at whatever cost. And there are people who don't want to do politics because they believe in certain values or ideas or changes that would like to create. And when they would open up to their phones and see stories of the so-called conservative premier of Ontario trashing what we are doing, they felt discouraged and they deserve someone to speak up for them. And I tell this guy, I don't care about your theatrics and your stunts. So Jamil Jivani is going to call out Doug Ford for being a poser, for being a conservative poser, being a progressive conservative, which is kind of redundant, being a progressive conservative that kind of cancel each other out, and just being a theatrical person, which obviously we could see for ourselves. Anytime there's crime sprees, anytime that, taxes are too high or a plant closes down or something like that, Doug Ford goes overreaching theatrics. He's like Chris Farley doing a stunt. And he goes overboard on the melodramatics, but doesn't actually take policy seriously. And my theory is the reason that he's doing that is because the Conservative Party, the actual establishment in the Conservative Party, not people like him, but people like Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole and those people, they want Doug Ford in their party. They want Doug Ford to be leading the Conservative Party. That's why they kind of did a hit on Pierre Poilievre, because they thought Pierre Poilievre was too fringe for their party. So they want someone like Doug Ford, who's an empty vessel, who doesn't actually stand for anything and is only there to just remain in power. And here's Jamil Jivani explicitly going after Doug Ford and pointing this out.
But I would say this is less of an ideological problem and more of a what is the point of politics problem. Okay, so let me explain what I mean. I don't think Doug Ford or the people in his administration believe they have an ideology. I don't believe they have come to a rational conclusion that there's a better way to be a conservative than what I or you would say. In fact, I'm not even sure they would be capable of having a conversation about conservative ideas or principles. What I think is more of the issue is there are people who think the goal of politics is to have power and maintain power for as long as possible at whatever cost is required to pay. And there are people who want to do politics because they believe in certain values or ideas or changes that they would like to create. And to me, that is...
And that's why someone like Doug Ford, who ran an entire campaign focusing on jobs and investment and Ontario was open for business, kisses the hand that feeds him, which is the federal government. That's why every time they mention Mark Carney in context, Doug Ford gushes about how Mark Carney is a visionary. He's working hard to fight Canada against Donald Trump. We're doing everything we can, even though Ontario is collapsing within because of the lack of leadership from someone like Doug Ford. He's a theatrical person. He's there only to fill the position of premier for just the fact that he wants to fill the position of premier. He wants to feel like the bigwig without actually having the responsibility of being a bigwig. That's what it is.
The difference in Ontario between a lot of the people who are, who are our candidates and myself. I don't want to speak for other people. So I'll say that's the difference between me and the difference between Doug Ford. It's weird when you talk to someone, as you might if you spend time with people in the current incarnation of Ford Nation. And they think that because someone put a good poll out for them, that you're supposed to be happy. Like, oh, you got a good poll. I guess that's good. And not to diminish the fact that that's a reality of our business, like we need to get public support. But if you're popular but you're not doing good things, why am I supposed to be happy about that? Yes. And to be perfectly honest, I also question, whether the negative effect of that is producing more cynicism among our people, right? If people think politicians don't believe in anything and they're not going to do anything, and regardless of what color your jersey is, you're going to have the same approach to big, important issues, then you're making a lot of people feel like politics isn't even worth getting involved in the first place. You're making a lot of people feel like making the time to vote is not worth it in the first place. And that is my biggest concern among anything as it relates to Doug Ford, is that is what he's doing to our people in Ontario and ventures to do to our people across the nation, I think, if he had his way. So that is what bothers me. And why I was so amped up on election night is because for weeks and weeks, I had been seeing volunteers putting their effort in to trying to help win this federal election. Kids who've never voted before, single moms making time after her shift to come and knock on doors, people who are giving everything they had. And when they would open up their phones and see stories of the so-called conservative premier of Ontario trashing what we were doing, they felt discouraged. And they deserve someone to speak up for them and tell this guy, I don't care about how, about your theatrics and your stunts. I don't respect you, and I'm going to point it out because I don't like what you're doing to the people who are trying to fight for a better country. That was the point I had to make.
There you go. There you go. Again, it gives me a bit of hope that there are people like him out there that make these statements. And, a lot of the times I don't mean to be the Debbie Downer. I don't mean to blackpill people when they say, there's no hope and then, both parties are the same and just get out of it. I don't mean to, put people down and to think that there's no hope for the future of countries. But you have to look at the reality. You have to look at the scope of where we're in right now. That, you have someone like Doug Ford who rallied campaign after campaign after campaign, Ford Nation, opening up Ontario for business. He was going to drive the province into a new force. And we have seen time and time again that once he gets comfortable in a position of power, that he's going to cave to his donors. He's going to cave to the establishment. He's going to cave to the people that put him in the position of power. He's not going for the people that voted him into office. He's going after the people that gave him the mass amounts of money, that flourishes his daily activities, and is just a massive corrupted individual, a corrupted vessel that is just pushing the same status quo as do the federal government. And that's why Mark Carney and Doug Ford and David Eby, it doesn't even matter who the person is, or even Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. Doesn't matter what political party, what jersey they're wearing, what colors they support. They kind of operate in the same way because they're all bought by the same donors. They're all bought by the same donors. And when you're in a position of power and you're surrounding yourself with these corrupted ghouls, the people that do control the country without you knowing, that's what makes this so daunting. That's why I say, at this point, there's not even really a point to vote, because no matter who you're voting for, the status quo establishment, the unelected deep state, is always going to win. And that's the same case with even the United States. People thought that, Trump was going to be this great visionary, and we're seeing more and more Donald Trump siding with the establishment. Is it better than a Kamala Harris victory? Maybe in some circumstances, but the bigger factor is the fact that the deep state is going to maintain its control no matter what. They tried to take Donald Trump out twice and did every unjustable lawfare tactic to try to diminish him. And Trump became president, and now he's kissing up to the establishment. So we know that Trump played to their favor somehow. Whether there was a sit down, whether Trump got blackmailed, I don't know what the case may be, but Trump eventually caved. And that's what worries me about this. That's what even worries me about this guy in particular, is he's saying the right things. He's saying the right things, and I applaud him for that. But being in a position of power, being surrounded by these gruesome entities that are purposely there to bait you, to purposely bait individuals that go into politics, thinking they're going to change the world, thinking that their vote is going to matter. Like, to paraphrase George Carlin, it's a club. It's a giant club, and you ain't in it. And that club is getting tighter and tighter and gripping onto specific individuals that stay out of line. Why do you think Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene are two of the biggest, targets right now in American politics, even though they're the most uniquely pro-American voices? Like Thomas Massey, everything that he's preaching is stuff that involves American people, American jobs, the American economy. When he went after Trump for the big, great, one beautiful bill, he said that this is not good for the American class. This is not good for the American population. Same with Marjorie Taylor Greene. So anyone that actually works in favor of you, in favor of the general public, in favor of the working class, they are the ones that are going to get targeted the most. And that's why they need certain people like Doug Ford, or they need, Donald Trump, or they need these figures that could play the populist card so well to trick people to think that they're on your side. But really, they're there to usher people in to more of the status quo and get people into this alignment so that we don't actually have a functioning society that works in favor of working class people. The same way Bernie Sanders did that to the left. Bernie Sanders, when he talks about, the billionaires and the trillionaires, he's not actually going against them. He's not actually going against them, but he's baiting people into his camp to usher them into the Democratic Party. Same with AOC, same with the Squad, yada, yada, yada. You get the picture. You get the picture. That politics to them is just this chess game to control as much power as possible, and it discourages people that are completely left out on the street to have any participation in it. And you wonder why you see a lot of the statistics, you see a lot of the numbers of why people going out to vote is decreasing, that the number of registered voters are decreasing, why people are just discouraged, why people are just fed up with the entire system, why so many people are leaving Canada. You wonder why that is. So, kudos on him for the words. I give credit to the fact that he's addressing the certain criticisms that we need, but that doesn't mean I'm going to favor him. That doesn't mean I'm going to make him the, quintessential hero in my life. I was told once that you should never have heroes because heroes are just human people, and eventually they're going to do something that you disagree with, and it's going to be detrimental to you. So there's not even a point to have heroes. And that's the case I'm making with this. That, yeah, he's saying the right thing. He was the first to call it the temporary foreign worker scandal, and he made the statement about human trafficking, which is all good. I applaud that. But he's also in a very corrupted position. He's in, the Parliament Hill position of the Conservative Party, which is also bought by the same donors as the Liberal Party. So is his statements going to hold up to any real rational action? Or is he also doing theatrics? That's the big picture. That's the big philosophical point that not a lot of people like to take. And not a lot of people like to think outside the duopoly, think outside the box, because then it would change your whole perspective of everything.